At the outset of the tale, the concept of ranking was introduced, a system designed to assess an individual's position in life. It served as both a motivator and a measure, determining who received what and how people pursued satisfaction. Power, intellect, wealth, social influence, and occupation all played roles in establishing one's worth. With the sophistication of modern tools and systems, an era had evolved into one where everything could be measured, compared, and assigned value. Amid this framework, the quiet beginning of a young boy's journey unfolded. He stood at a crossroad, uncertain of what lay beyond, unable to see the shape of his future. In a quiet little village of Tully, where life moved at a gentle and predictable pace, a boy named Loue worked diligently in the woods, chopping down wood. Each movement of his axe echoed his enthusiasm, the sharp rhythm revealing not just youthful energy, but a contentment in action. His expression shone with quiet joy, a subtle celebration of effort and routine. 16 years of age, Loue bore the strength of adolescence, and his hands were already calloused with the labor of responsibility. A nearby villager approached and asked him to sharpen a sword. Without hesitation or question, Loue agreed, nodding with calm certainty. As the exchange concluded, a girl named Yuna appeared, and she struck the man with a swift kick and chastised him sharply, berating him for his constant reliance on Loue. Her tone carried a natural authority, and at 16, she radiated a fierce and commanding presence. Townspeople had long remarked that Loue had always been forgetful and accommodating, even as a child, someone who never turned anyone away, regardless of the request. But Yuna was not finished as she grasped Loue by his collar and shook him, her frustration with the situation boiling over. He remained passive, unfazed by the outburst, which only deepened her irritation. Then, her voice softened when she admitted that she understood his kindness, that it came from a good place, but insisted it didn't make it any less vexing. At that moment, a wide smile lit up her face as though a sudden idea had sparked. She leaned in close and whispered something meant only for him, a suggestion to leave the village for a short time. She spoke of a hidden path she had discovered, a secret trail untouched by others. Before either could take a step toward that idea, Yuna's grandmother arrived. A stern, commanding figure with eyes that brooked no defiance, she delivered a firm denial. Leaving the town had long been forbidden, and she made it clear that the rule was not up for debate. Yuna protested, her words laced with frustration, but the old woman remained stern in her words. She commanded the men of the village to seize her granddaughter's arm and pulled her away. They came in and restrained the girl, preventing her from lashing out. The grandmother declared that Yuna's behavior needed close monitoring, her recklessness a danger that demanded vigilance. Just then, another villager approached Loue and asked for help in fetching water. Loue agreed without resistance. Observing both teenagers for a moment, the man noted how different they seemed, despite their similar age and the fact that they were the only ones that young in the village. He looked directly at Loue and encouraged him to rest more often, to consider his own desires instead of always putting others first. To the man's surprise, Loue respectfully declined the advice, expressing a quiet determination to keep helping. His memories drifted through his mind, memories of the townspeople who had taken him in after his parents' passing. He had been embraced not as a stranger, but as one of their own. Their warmth and kindness had become his foundation. Even now, they looked out for him as if he were their blood. That sense of belonging was not lost on him. With silent resolve, he vowed to repay their care in the only way he knew, by being there for them, always. The village and its people had become his anchor. Moved by Lau's words, the man offered him a room in his home, but Loue gently declined. He explained that he still lived in the house his parents had left behind. That place held memories, and it felt right to remain there. Deep inside, he repeated a quiet truth to himself, that the people in Tully meant everything to him. Somewhere else, Yuna now sat confined inside a wooden cage. Her gaze stared longingly at the open world beyond. Her voice rang out in protest as she called for her grandmother, pleading to be released. The old woman stood nearby, watching her with narrowed eyes, muttering disapproval. She criticized the girl's stubborn nature and lamented that she wasn't as calm or agreeable as Loue. Yuna pressed for an explanation. Why, she asked, was the idea of leaving the village treated like a crime? The grandmother's reply was cold. Traders came to town often enough. so there was no reason to expose themselves to the risks outside. But Yuna refused to let the argument end there. She insisted it wasn't about practical needs. It was about curiosity, about the desire to see the vast world beyond their small confines. There had to be more than what they had been allowed to see. The grandmother's tone darkened. She revealed that someone beyond the village borders bore a deep hatred toward them. The words froze Yuna. With urgency, she demanded to know who it was. Her grandmother, however, offered no details. She claimed that time would eventually reveal everything, and that Yuna needed to be patient and stay within the village. Elsewhere, Loue moved with practiced ease as he poured water into the well, the water rising steadily. He took a moment to scan the area, a quiet pause in his routine. Just then, a pebble hit the back of his head. As he turned, he spotted Yuna crouched behind a stone wall, her grin full of mischief. She gestured for silence, her escape both familiar and exhilarating. Loue stared in stunned disbelief, but she only laughed and declared that sneaking out had become second nature to her. She urged him to come with her, the excitement in her eyes unmistakable. They stepped away from the village together. Loue hesitated at first, his lips forming soft words of concern. He feared the reaction they'd face if caught, his voice low with anxiety over her grandmother's wrath. But Yuna reassured him. This time, it would be brief. They wouldn't stay out for long. Yuna informed Loue that she had something special to show him. Without delay, she led him into a lush green forest, its canopy alive with gentle light. She moved ahead eagerly, her energy pulling them forward, while Loue followed with quiet curiosity, his steps cautious yet attentive. As they continued, she mentioned with growing enthusiasm that they were nearing the place she had told him about earlier. Upon reaching the edge of the woods, the trees parted, and the forest gave way to an immense, breathtaking valley that stretched endlessly across the horizon. Yuna let out a joyful cry, overwhelmed by the grandeur of the sight. Her hands gestured highly toward the open landscape, her face lit up by sheer awe. The valley shimmered under the sun, vast and impossibly beautiful, and she stood there marveling at its scale. Loue stood beside her, visibly moved. He had never seen anything like it before. The vastness left him breathless, and he released a surprised cry, struck by the wonder of the moment. With her expression turning more serious, Yuna asked if he understood how the real world functioned beyond the village. Her question left Loue intrigued but uncertain, his brow furrowing in confusion. She then revealed an item from her bag, a secret book she had purchased from traveling merchant. The book, she explained, held rare information about the ranking system used outside their secluded village. Holding it with care, she described how the system affected nearly every walk of life. Yuna began to explain how the world operated outside Tully. Adventurers, transporters, healers, musicians, and countless others were all sorted and evaluated through ranks. Achievements were measured across many dimensions: strength, resources, influence, and even the sophistication of one's weapons. Individuals who climbed the system's ladder were known as ranked figures, the elite of their respective fields. Yuna spoke with intensity and admiration, emphasizing the constant competition, the struggle people endured to ascend through effort and force of will. The information was intriguing for Loue, whose eyes widened with dawning realization. The outside world, as described, followed rules completely unlike the ones he had grown up with. Yuna confessed that her dream was to become a ranked adventurer. She yearned to explore the world, confront challenges, cross paths with formidable opponents, and earn widespread admiration. Her voice rose with passion as she detailed the life she envisioned, full of missions, battles, and the joy of discovering the unknown. Loue was cautious, gently reminded her of a long-standing village rule that prohibited anyone from leaving. But Yuna interrupted him, brushing aside the restriction with determination. Her decision had already been made, she said. She then extended her hand, eyes shining, and asked him to accompany her on the journey. With a wide grin and a voice full of excitement, she declared her wish that they would go on their adventure together. In that instant, a forgotten memory returned to Yuna. She recalled an incident from early childhood when she had been just 5 years old. A massive eagle had swooped down and attacked her. Yuna described how, during that harrowing moment, Loue had somehow summoned a strange and powerful force within himself. Facing down the monstrous bird, He had acted with courage far beyond his years. It was a burst of strength that had astonished her. Loue stood there, stunned by the account. He asked if what she remembered was true. Yuna confirmed it with enthusiasm, reminding him of the strange words he had shouted in that moment. She had known then that Loue possessed a hidden strength, one that surfaced when he was most serious. Smiling, she told him once again that his potential was greater than he realized. In the world beyond Tully, he would shine, she said. He had the capacity to stand out, not just survive, but flourish. She asked again if he would travel the world with her, explore unknown lands, and face whatever came their way. Her offer was extended with hope. Loue hesitated. After a moment of silence, he responded in a quiet voice, confessing his deep love for the town, the people, the memories, the life he had always known. He couldn't imagine leaving it all behind. His words hit Yuna hard. In an instant, her expression shifted. She struck him out of frustration, the force of her emotions erupting into action. Her voice rose in anger, calling him stubborn and accusing him of being blind to what mattered. Then she turned away, shouting that she would leave without him. She claimed she no longer cared and would continue her path alone, with no one to hold her back. Still seated, Loue called after her, telling her to take care on her way home. The moment lingered. He hadn't considered the possibility that she might leave the town forever. As the valley spread out before him, her words about the outside world and its relentless rankings echoed in his mind. He stared at the horizon, the sun dipping low and bathing the earth in a golden glow. Time passed, and twilight turned to dusk. Loue remained still, wrestling with new thoughts that tugged at his sense of duty and belonging. Eventually, he rose and began walking back toward the village. As he traveled, something unexpected caught his attention. In the darkening sky, a strange shape appeared. It hovered, immense and ominous, unlike anything he had seen before. Its presence filled him with unease. Without warning, a blinding beam of energy shot down from the unidentified flying object. The shockwave hit with such intensity that Loue was thrown off balance. He struggled to comprehend what had just happened. The object, immense and alien, vanished suddenly just as fast as it appeared, and panic surged through him. Without hesitation, he ran, his only thought to return home to make sure everyone was safe. He pushed himself harder, repeating silently that everything would be fine. The town would be there. The villagers would be there. Yuna would be safe. But when he arrived at the place where the village should have stood, dread flooded his chest. The town was gone. In its place was an enormous crater, wide and silent. The buildings, the paths, the lives, everything had vanished. Loue stood frozen, disbelief stealing the words from his mouth. Fear and confusion gripped his mind. He muttered unintelligibly, then shouted, calling for Yuna, her grandmother, anyone who might still be alive. There was no reply. His voice echoed into emptiness. No one answered. In his most shattered and desperate state, Loue saw an image of Yuna, smiling warmly at him. Her voice, soft and reassuring, echoed in his memory, telling him that everything would be all right and that he would never be alone. That simple promise clung to him like a final thread. In the silence that followed, pain surged through him. He remembered the villagers, how they had embraced him and told him that he belonged, that he was no longer a boy with no one. On that day, they had become his family. Overcome with grief, Loue let out a raw, agonizing scream as he collapsed to his knees amidst the smoking ruins of his home. The remnants of the village lay all around him, buried under scorched earth and silence. He trembled as the weight of what had been lost settled into his bones. Eyes wide and welled up, he searched for answers that refused to come. A bitter question left his lips. Why had this devastation fallen upon his people? Why had fate turned against them? It was then that he heard someone spoke up for being unable to do anything. He cursed his inaction, condemned himself for doing nothing as their lives were taken, for being too late yet again. A lone figure emerged from the distance, walking silently across the ruined landscape. The stranger came to a halt just above the crater and stood still. He was observing Loue without speaking at first. The man immediately ran down toward the kid, stopping just right in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and direct. He asked whether Loue from the village of Tully. Loue responded in a voice almost too quiet to hear. With sadness carved into every word, he confirmed that he is. The man studied him with a gaze that held more sorrow than surprise. He then informed Loue that the island that had manifested earlier, the strange floating structure, had already vanished. Confused by the mention of an island, Loue asked for clarification. He struggled to understand what the man meant, his thoughts spinning around the mysterious object that had appeared and disappeared in moments. Emotion overcame him. His voice cracked as he demanded to know what had happened to the villagers, his cries rising with desperation. In a firmer tone, the man replied that Loue needed to let go of the village. There was nothing to return to. He handed Loue a small piece of paper on which a destination was written. It was, he said, a place of safety, a final refuge. Rage overtook Loue. He pulled the man by the collar, his hands trembling with fury, and demanded the truth. The man shouted back, telling him that the village no longer existed and that someone like Loue had no place getting involved in matters far beyond his understanding. Then the man walked off. He was hoping that Loue forget everything, forget the people, the loss, the questions. To look into it any further, he thought, would only put Loue in the same danger. But Loue couldn't accept that. A fire rose in his chest. Yuna's words echoed again in his mind, her belief that when he was serious, no one could match him. In that moment, something inside him stirred. His grief transformed into fury, and from that fury came resolve. He refused to forget. He vowed he would not turn away. He would find that island, wherever it had gone, and retrieve everyone who had been taken from him. As that conviction solidified, other memories resurfaced. He recalled the landslide that had taken his parents. He had been just a child then, left to face the world alone. The loneliness of those early days had scarred him deeply. Yet the people of Tully village had opened their homes and hearts. They had raised him, cared for him, made him feel human again. They had saved him from despair. Thoughts of Yuna followed, the only friend he had. She had always been near, offering him flowers, watching him with eyes full of trust and laughter. The village itself was a haven of kindness. He remembered how readily they helped anyone in need, no matter the burden. In that moment, a sharp clarity washed over him. He could never abandon them. He would never let them fade into memory. The energy, unlike anything he had ever felt before, stirred within him. It surged through his limbs and heart like a living current. His resolve summoned it. The energy, prana, burned like a pulse of light within him. He gritted his teeth and declared to himself that no matter what dangers awaited, he would go to that island and bring them back. His purpose was now carved into his soul. The stranger who had stood silently was stunned. He watched as Lau's body radiated with energy, an aura so fierce that it began to distort the very air. Prana, the raw force of thought and spirit, had awakened in Loue at an intensity few had ever seen. The man, shaken and amazed, recalled what little he had learned about this power. Prana was the essence that flowed through all living things, a form of mental strength few could control. Most never even realized they had it. Yet Loue had summoned it. Not only that, but he had made it visible. Normally colorless and passive, prana rarely manifested in a form the eye could see. But those born with exceptional gifts could bring it forth with clarity and force. Different peoples, the man remembered, channeled different variations of this power. He began to wonder whether the village of Tully had harbored a unique kind of prana, one that had drawn destruction upon itself. As he watched the space around Loue ripple and bend, realization dawned. Loue was not just a survivor. He was someone from Babel, a name that carried ancient weight. The man had originally intended to shield him. Now he understood that Loue didn't need his protection. Still, guilt gnawed at the man. Loue had no idea of the true danger that loomed over him or the reasons the stranger had tried to keep him hidden. Finally, without another word, the man drew his blade and threw it into the ground right in front of Loue. The sound echoed through the barren field. The gesture was silent, but clear, a challenge, an invitation. If Loue truly meant to chase this path, he would need strength. The man addressed him with a voice that carried the weight of conviction. If Loue genuinely intended to reach that island, he would need to take up a sword and prove that his will could match his ambition. If he passed this trial, then the man would personally guide him, training him in stealth and survival, preparing him for the world that waited just beyond the edge of everything he knew. The man unsheathed his red, glowing sword and calmly instructed Loue to strike him with genuine intent, as if aiming to kill. There was no hesitation in his tone, only expectation. Loue nodded, and without another word, he lifted the sword that embedded into the ground. Loue stood tall, his body enveloped in a vibrant green aura. It pulsed with his unique prana, raw, unfamiliar, but full of strength. Across from him, the middle-aged man radiated crimson energy, his stance steady and battle-hardened. Without waiting, Loue surged forward, propelled by instinct and sheer willpower. His sword gleamed, poised for strike. His prana burned like a torch, granting him strength beyond what his body should have allowed. At the first exchange of blows, the man immediately noticed a flaw. Lau's swordsmanship was unrefined, his movements awkward and inconsistent. Yet despite the lack of technique, every one of Lau's strikes carried terrifying weight. He moved as if guided not by training, but by something deeper, raw resolve and unbreakable spirit. Though clumsy, his attacks came with explosive power, and each blow forced the man to react with more effort than he had expected. Their blades clashed with a resounding crack. As sparks flew, their eyes locked, sharp, unwavering, filled with mutual recognition of strength and seriousness. Another impact sent waves of prana flooding through the air, rippling outward in visible surges. It emanated from Loue, wild and uncontrolled, and the man felt a jolt of shock at its sheer magnitude. A crack appeared on his sword. Though he said nothing, but deep inside, he understood something rare stood before him. He whispered quietly to himself, recognizing that this boy was not ordinary. He was the real deal. Loue pressed on, refusing to slow, his face a mixture of fury and focus. Blow after blow, he drove forward. His inexperience with a blade did nothing to dampen the storm he summoned. It was not sword technique that carried him, but overwhelming intent and an eruption of prana. When the fight ended, the man lowered his weapon and motioned for Loue to sit beside him. The battle had offered all the answers he needed. In a steady voice, the man began to speak of the place known as Sky Island, or in another tongue, the Island of the Gods. He explained that this island typically floated above the sea, hidden from sight, but on rare occasions it manifested suddenly, unleashing destruction with no warning. His voice grew more somber as he admitted his many failed attempts to stop the island, each one ending in loss and regret. Then, lowering his gaze, he revealed something darker, a theory that those exposed to the light emanating from the island were not destroyed, but transported, taken directly to Sky Island. Lau's mind raced. He considered what might happen if he were to touch that light. The man answered without emotion, stating that the light was unpredictable. It offered no guarantee. Even if Loue survived, what came next remained a complete unknown. When Loue asked what path he should follow to reach the island, the man answered with absolute clarity. There was one straightforward route, to be ranked among the top 10 adventurers in the world. This was all new to Loue, so he asked the man to explain. Adventurers, the man revealed, were professionals tasked with exploring new lands, retrieving relics, and facing unknown dangers. Among the various roles in society, they formed the largest and most dynamic group. Yet within that vast order, the 10 strongest were feared and revered. These elite few were known as monsters, not for cruelty, but for their unmatched power and skill. He warned Loue that Sky Island had long been marked as one of the most dangerous places in existence. Many explorers had attempted to reach it, but few ever returned. The man's eyes narrowed as he posed the question directly. Knowing the risks, did Loue still wish to go? Without a pause, Loue answered that he did. His voice was steady, firm, without a shred of doubt. The man fell silent for a moment, watching him. Then, after a long breath, he stated his decision. He would train Loue for 1 year, no more. The training would be brutal and would focus solely on the sword. The rest would be up to Loue. After that year, he would have to climb the adventure rankings on his own. The man introduced himself as Adol, the highest-ranked knight in the world, humanity's strongest knight. When he asked for the boy's name, Loue responded simply and firmly. Adol then reached out and shook Lau's hand, adding with a half-smile that he would never go easy on him. He admitted, almost casually, that Loue was the first person to strike him with such force on their first clash. Loue met his eyes, unflinching and ready for whatever was to come. What followed would later be described by Loue as a year of hell. Training began with little ceremony and no mercy. Every day was a gauntlet of agony. Lau's hands and feet were soon covered in bloodied cuts and bruises, raw from endless drills. Muscles tore and bones fractured. The training grounds became a crucible. Pain was constant, failure a frequent companion. Lau's blood stained the earth day after day, but he never stopped. Adol spoke nothing more of Sky Island as the months passed. It was as if he wanted Lau to find his own truth, to decide for himself whether the answers were worth the suffering. There were no more explanations, only silence that seemed telling him to find out the rest on his own. And still Lau endured because his mind remained locked on the people he had lost. The villagers who had taken him in, the friends who had shown him kindness, Yuna with her fearless spirit and boundless determination. He believed with every part of his being that they were still alive somewhere on that island. That belief became his anchor. Each morning, he rose not for himself, but for them. Every cut was a reminder. Every failure pushed him harder. Questions burned in his mind. Why had his town disappeared? What was the true nature of Sky Island? What force had torn his world apart? The sword became his answer, and he carried it like a vow. With every swing, he reminded himself of his goal, to rise through the ranks, to uncover the truth, to reclaim what he had lost. 1 year passed. Lau stood beside Adol atop a windswept hill, overlooking a landscape bathed in morning light. The past year had changed him. His body had hardened, his spirit sharpened. He no longer looked like a boy. He had been forged into something new. The wind tugged at their clothes as silence stretched between them. Then, without a hint of doubt, Adol asked the question that would define what came next, whether he was ready for the next journey. As he looked out across the horizon, Lau responded with calm conviction, stating he had been ready for a long time. His eyes remained steady, his expression serene. There was no doubt in his posture and no hesitation in his voice. The winds brushed past as he recalled Yuna's words, the one she had spoken before she vanished, when she had shared her dream of becoming a ranked adventurer and asked him to join her. That memory was etched deep in his heart. He remembered her restless eyes, always longing for a world beyond their village. She had dreamed of exploring vast lands, of climbing the adventurer rankings, of proving herself in places none from Tully had ever gone. Lau now realized that he was about to embark on the very journey she had once dreamed of. Her absence, once painful, had become a guiding light. Deep within, he made a quiet decision. If Yuna could no longer chase that dream, then he would carry it in her place. At that moment, Adol walked off. With a simple gesture, he told Lau it was time. He asked him to go forward. Lau responded with a firm and quiet tone, assuring Adol that he was ready. One glance was enough to confirm how much Lau had changed. He was 17 now, taller and stronger. A full year of relentless training had reshaped him in body and mind. Lau stepped into the world as Adol's disciple, humanity's strongest knight of the era. His journey toward the Sky Island had begun. The starting point of that journey was the kingdom of Baltir, where Lau's home village, Tully, was located. From there, the road led toward the grand royal capital, Trakista, a sprawling city where ambitions were shaped and destinies recorded. At the heart of the capital stood the Recognition Office, an authoritative institution responsible for maintaining and updating the adventurer rankings. Within the Recognition Office, in a cluttered room filled with papers, books, and reports, a young woman lay asleep atop her desk. Luke, her cheek was pressed against a stack of documents, and her breath rose and fell in a slow rhythm. Amid the peace of her sleep, someone repeatedly called out to her, trying to wake her up. A sudden jolt made her sit up in alarm. Despite the restless night, her eyes lit up as she exclaimed that she had completely overslept. A moment later, she was walking with a station worker in the hall when a worker asked if she had spent another sleepless night poring over ranking documents. She admitted that it was part of her duty to stay informed. The black-haired lady explained that working at the Recognition Office meant keeping track of rising talents and potential threats. Unlike her, she suggested, Luke should take better care of her health, especially given the weight of her responsibilities. The Recognition Office was not merely a bureaucratic entity. It was a network of experts tasked with evaluating adventurers worldwide. Their agents traveled far and wide, witnessing battles, testing skills, and assigning fair ranks based on performance and potential. Only a select few were permitted to hold such positions. Applicants faced extensive tests of judgment, knowledge, and combat analysis. It was widely considered one of the most difficult career paths, and acceptance was a rare honor. Despite this, Luke smiled modestly and reminded her colleague that she was still just a junior staff member. Promotions would require continued effort, but she was determined. When asked about her ambitions, she hesitated with a shy laugh and replied that she wanted to do many things. The lady teased her, suggesting that becoming the exclusive agent of a famous explorer would be the fastest way to advance. Luke's smile faded for a moment as she admitted that she hadn't found anyone who truly caught her attention yet. The lady laughed, blaming her high standards. Luke quickly countered that the issue wasn't her standards. It was the lack of worthy adventurers. She spoke with a certain passion, lamenting that the rankings had become stagnant. There was a time, she said, when competition burned hot and titles shifted often. Now the list barely changed. Without movement, rankings lost meaning. The black-haired lady shook her head and accused her of being obsessed with the ranking. Luke laughed, wholeheartedly and without apology. She acknowledged the accusation, calling herself hopelessly dedicated. But behind the humor, there was something sincere. Luke admitted that she was waiting, hoping, for someone new to arrive and shake the rankings, someone who could reignite the sense of wonder that once defined the adventuring world. As they left the office together and stepped into a wide room, they found it full of people. The place buzzed with energy as aspiring adventurers gathered for the registration test. Luke asked why there were so many this year. The lady explained that the turnout was unusually large, likely due to the recent classification of Azaban Forest as a high-risk zone. News of danger always attracted those seeking challenge and glory. As the crowd swelled, the two began analyzing potential candidates. The lady pointed out a cloaked figure, Aldarkus, standing with quiet confidence. This young man, ranked 753rd among mercenaries, was the leader of Red Wolf Mercenary, a well-known mercenary group respected across the kingdom. Next, she mentioned a young man named Eddie Markman, ranked 402nd in the archer class. Eddie came from a lineage famous for its archery mastery. It was said that his technique and speed were so refined he might one day break long-standing records. Beyond them, the pair observed others, an adventurer with a mysterious background, a knight whose armor bore the sigils of a fallen kingdom, and a navigator. The black-haired lady identified them all by rank and specialty with practiced ease. Their names, achievements, and reputations had already passed across her desk. And yet, despite all these notable figures, Luke's heart still searched for the one who could rise above them all. The lady complimented her ability to recall the rankings without even checking the records. Luke smiled and admitted it came naturally to her. After all, her entire life revolved around processing, analyzing, and maintaining adventure data. She grew visibly excited as she explained how coveted the adventurer title had become. It wasn't just prestigious, it was practical. Holding the official rank granted access to restricted regions and high-risk zones. Without certification, many of the most important sites were off-limits. The title was not only a badge of honor, but a license to enter the front lines of history. While they spoke, another person arrived at the front desk and rang the bell. The lady in the white dress immediately walked out of the room to welcome the incoming guest. It was Loue who arrived at the front desk, and the lady greeted him warmly. Loue immediately conveyed his intent to register for the rankings. She walked him through the process. The recognition office managed registrations across the continent. Though rankings could be updated by any authorized agent during field evaluations, all first-time applicants were required to register directly at the central office. At that, Loue asked to register himself for the adventure category ranking. She informed him that he was in luck. The test was about to begin and offered him a chance to join immediately. She took out a piece of paper for Loue to fill out and noted that there would be a registration fee of 3,000 del. Loue agreed, quietly filling out the necessary forms, and paid the fee without complaint. After he completed the documents, the receptionist handed him a small slip with his test number, 53. Once the transaction was complete, she thanked him and directed him to the waiting area. Elsewhere, Luke from earlier noticed Loue as he passed by. She remarked that many people still didn't seem to understand what the recognition office actually did. The lady chuckled, admitting that it had been a while since anyone had needed a full explanation. Luke offered to assist with the upcoming exam evaluations, saying it might be refreshing to handle indoor responsibilities for a change. Inside the testing hall, The black-haired lady began briefing the assembled applicants. The registration exam would be divided into 3 sections, which was a written test, a practical assessment, and a final phase, the details of which will be disclosed later. She encouraged the candidates not to lose heart if they struggled with one section, as strong performance in others could still lead to success. The written test began immediately. The room grew tense. Pens scratched paper, brows furrowed in concentration. One candidate muttered under his breath, overwhelmed by the depth and breadth of the material. In what felt like moments, the receptionist called for time. The test was over. She instructed all participants to remain nearby until the results were posted and told them that the second phase would commence in 2 hours in the forest just outside the town. Back in the office, she called upon Luke to help grade the written papers. The young agent responded cheerfully and joined her at the grading table. As they sifted through the stack of answer sheets, Luke's eyes paused on one. The test belonged to candidate number 53, Loue. She remembered him clearly as the quiet one with the serious expression. Curiosity turned to confusion, then to surprise. Every answer on Lau's written test was incorrect. She stared at the paper, stunned. She expressed her sympathy for those forced to face such a tough exam with no preparation. Luke frowned, thinking about how disheartening it must be to fail without understanding why. 2 hours later, the candidates regrouped at the edge of the forest for the practical examination. The black-haired lady stood in front of them and explained the objective, which was for participants would need to search for specific treasures hidden within the forest. A large board displayed the list of required items and their corresponding point values. She outlined the rules clearly. No combat was permitted. The first person to reach and touch an item would be awarded the points. Stealing or damaging another's find would result in disqualification. Contestants began murmuring amongst themselves, boasting about their specialties. Some claimed expertise in medicinal herbs. Others bragged about rare insect identification. With a sharp whistle, the lady signaled the start of the test. The forest echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps as candidates dispersed. Once the clearing emptied, the black-haired lady let out a tired breath and admitted to Luke that she was grateful for the brief moment of peace. She wondered aloud how many would pass the test. Luke guessed that perhaps half of them might make it through. The 2 staff members chatted quietly as they observed the forest from afar, with one of them musing that it was easier to judge performance when the applicants moved like this. She added that everyone seemed pretty skilled. A moment passed, and the first to return was a figure draped in dark clothing, Darkus. He presented a glimmering piece of rigil or worth 120 points. The lady raised an eyebrow and asked if he was sure he didn't want to continue the exam to earn more points. He waved off the suggestion, replying that it made no difference. His role as a freelancer was what mattered most, and he had no plans to compete seriously in the adventure system. She warned him that higher point totals could help secure a better ranking, but he simply shrugged. Soon after, another person ran toward them, Eddie Markman. He hadn't expected anyone to arrive before him, but someone had. Eddie stepped forward confidently and revealed a rare bird feather valued at 180 points. Darkus had already completed the task and stood waiting, calm and slightly smug. When Eddie Markman stood beside him, Darkus couldn't help but mock him, drawing attention to the single bird feather Eddie held. The teasing was sharp, but Eddie didn't falter. With quiet assurance, he explained that the feather came from a rare bird capable of flying 500 kilometers per hour in complete silence. Darkus snapped back, suggesting that a clown would be better suited to Eddie. Their exchange carried the weight of pride and subtle rivalry. Luke observed with amusement, noting how competitive energy often brought out the more dramatic side of adventurers. The black-haired lady whispered that the ranking system seemed to stoke ego as much as ambition, and Luke chuckled, agreeing that such tension was part of the process. Suddenly, the conversation and tension paused as the sound of steady, deliberate footsteps echoed from the forest. Everyone turned their heads as silence fell. Emerging from the tree line, Loue walked into the clearing, dragging the massive, bloodied carcass of a red bear behind him. The sight shocked everyone. Loue approached calmly and stopped in front of the exam official. With a steady voice, he admitted he didn't know how to remove the gallbladder, the required component from the red bear, so he had brought the entire creature as proof instead. He then asked if this method of submission was acceptable. The black-haired lady hesitated, clearly surprised by the delivery, but nodded, saying that while unusual, it met the requirements. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The red bear was a powerful and dangerous creature, yet Loue had not only survived an encounter with one, he had defeated it and transported the body without any support. Loue came up to him. She was particularly surprised that he had correctly identified such a rare creature despite failing the written portion of the exam so miserably. When she questioned him, Loue simply explained that bears like that lived near his village. His tone was simple, matter-of-fact, and carried no arrogance. Nearby, one of the candidates whispered to a friend that he had actually witnessed Lau's fight with the bear, prompting Luke to pay attention. At first, the man sounded confident, but as he recalled the scene, his voice began to falter. It had happened so quickly. One moment, Loue had been walking. Then, the red bear burst from the underbrush. Without hesitation, Loue had drawn his sword and felled the beast with a single, devastating strike. The onlookers struggled to process what they had seen. To take down a red bear alone was astonishing. To do it effortlessly, and with such calm precision, bordered on unreal. Luke continued to study Loue silently. Her expression caught somewhere between awe and suspicion. An hour passed. All candidates were then summoned to an underground training arena beneath the main facility for the final portion of the exam. The room resembled a training hall, lined with old stone, heavy gates, and reinforced walls. The black-haired lady stepped forward and briefed the group. She reminded them that in the world of adventuring, monsters weren't always the greatest danger. People were. Explorers often found themselves in uncharted territory, lawless zones plagued by bandits, pirates, and rogue adventurers. The purpose of this test was to evaluate how they handled such unpredictable threats. She clarified that the final exam would consist of sparring duels. These would not be tests of victory or defeat, but rather of adaptability, strategy, and judgment. Performance would be assessed holistically. Among the candidates, a large, muscular man marched over to Darkus and challenged him outright. He mocked Darkus for submitting a rock in the earlier round, scoffing at his mercenary rank and questioning his competence. Fueled by pride, he launched a forceful attack without warning. But Darkus was unfazed. With minimal movement and surgical precision, he countered and knocked the challenger unconscious in a single motion. The room fell silent. Darkus turned to the lady and offered a polite apology, stating that he had lost his temper. She assured him it was fine. The man he had defeated was already slated for elimination. Whispers filled the hall. Those watching quickly realized that taking on someone with Darkus's credentials wasn't just bold, it was foolish. Mildly concerned, the black-haired lady wondered inwardly regarding of who should be paired against Darkus in the official matches. Luke stepped forward with a confident suggestion. She wanted to choose the match personally. The black-haired lady raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure of the reasoning, but granted her permission anyway, though not without a hint of hesitation. The sparring matches began. Candidates were called forward in pairs and sent into the central arena. The fighting was intense. Each contestant brought their own style and strength, showcasing a wide range of skill levels. Some relied on brute force, others on agility, and a few on clever trickery. By the 8th match, murmurs began again as the official announced the participants. It would be Darkus, candidate number 27, and Eddie, number 41, versus Loue, number 53, fighting alone. The announcement stirred confusion. Some questioned whether it was fair. Others assumed it was a mistake. Yet Darkus responded with a quiet jab, noting that it wasn't the first time people had underestimated him. Eddie cracked his neck and rolled his shoulders indifferent. Loue said nothing, already stepping forward into the arena. The black-haired lady was surprised and asked Luke if she was absolutely sure about this decision. Luke nodded firmly, her gaze intense. She mused aloud that her instincts might not be wrong. In her eyes, Loue wasn't just another participant. He was something else entirely. A force hidden in plain sight. A monster in human form. The arena quieted as the match was set. Spectators leaned forward. Officials readied their scoring boards. At one end stood Eddie, his posture honed by years of archery training. Beside him stood Darkus, leader of the Red Wolf mercenary group, whose exploits were spoken of across kingdoms. Together, they represented strength, skill, and experience. Opposite them stood Loue, calm, unflinching, alone. He showed no signs of doubt or hesitation. His shoulders were relaxed, his grip on the sword light but firm. his gaze fixed squarely on his opponents. Around the edges of the arena, the recognition office staff observed in silence, their eyes locked on what promised to be a fight none of them would forget. The stories about Darkus and Eddie Markman were well known, especially among those who followed the rankings. Just last year, Darkus had led his mercenary unit against the Khmer Mafia, an infamous criminal syndicate ranked 62nd among the most dangerous organizations in the world. The operation had ended with Darkus defeating 7 of their top-ranking members, including the boss himself. His name was now etched in stories told around campfires and training halls across the continent. Meanwhile, Eddie Markman came from one of the most elite archer families. He was the heir of the Markman bloodline and had shown remarkable skill with a bow from early childhood. Once ranked second among all shooters, his father had trained him personally. Among archers, Eddie's name carried both weight and respect. His reputation was built not just on lineage, but on undeniable precision and intellect. These two fighters, one a war-tested mercenary, the other a masterful marksman, now faced a third contender, Loue, the quiet and unfamiliar youth whom none of them had heard of. The match promised to be intense, with tension crackling in the air like a brewing storm. The black-haired lady raised her hand, her voice cutting across the crowd as she signaled the start of the match. All 3 fighters leaped into motion the moment the spar began. Eddie was the first to launch an attack, firing a swift arrow toward his opponent. Loue reacted with calm efficiency, dodging the arrow, and let it pass harmlessly. Without losing momentum, Loue rushed toward Darkus with razor-sharp focus. The two clashed violently. Sword met sword in a flurry of furious exchanges. Each strike was laced with intent, the clang of steel ringing loud in the underground arena. Their blades blurred as they exchanged blows. Neither yielded. The onlookers could hardly keep up, their eyes struggling to follow the pace. One spectator muttered that the only thing he could register anymore was the sound of metal colliding. Loue surged forward with a mighty strike, forcing Darkus to stumble backward, visibly surprised by the sheer force of the blow. Seizing the opening, Loue attempted a finishing strike. His eyes gleamed with lethal intent as he soared poised to land the strike. Loue couldn't finish the swing because at that same moment, Eddie found an opening and began firing a rapid volley of arrows from a distance. Lou's sword moved with uncanny speed, parrying every arrow with fluid precision. The audience gasped in disbelief. He was defending against 2 elite fighters simultaneously and not only surviving, but controlling the pace. There was a brief pause as the 3 combatants reset their footing. Loue stood motionless, his expression composed. He stared at both opponents with quiet resolve. During that moment of respite, Darkus remarked to Eddie that Loue was clearly a skilled swordsman, perhaps even more than he had expected. Eddie nodded in agreement, saying he had never encountered anyone quite like him. Breaking his silence, Loue spoke for the first time during the match, asking whether either of them held any other notable ranks. Eddie answered with confidence, stating he was ranked 402nd among archers. Darkus followed, mentioning his own placement at 753rd among freelancers. Loue nodded and, with clarity in his voice, stated that he understood. Then something changed. A wave of powerful energy began to emanate from Lou's form, thick and visible in the air. He spoke with certainty, claiming that if he could defeat both of them, he would climb to the 3 digits ranks without hesitation. The surge of energy that followed sent chills through the room. Observers stepped back instinctively. The air shimmered around him, saturated with dense prana. Eddie's face tightened in disbelief, while Darkus found himself caught between awe and dread. Neither could understand how such immense power had remained hidden until now. Luke stared in awe as Lou's prana burst into the visible spectrum. She had studied ranked fighters for years, but never witnessed anything quite like this. Her instincts had been correct. This was no ordinary youth. Now visibly alarmed, Eddie pulled his arrow once more. He reminded Loue that ranking wasn't just about one's profession. Then, with cold determination, he revealed his additional rankings. Not only at 402nd among archers and 78th among expert marksmen. His declaration complete, he fired an arrow at Loue with deadly intent. Loue vanished from his position before the arrow even reached him. In the next instant, he was behind Eddie. A swift, decisive blow rendered Eddie unconscious, sending him crumpling to the ground without a sound. The crowd erupted into stunned silence. Loue turned calmly to face his remaining opponent. Now, without his comrade, Darkus stepped forward, regaining his composure. The match had taken an unexpected turn. Loue, who minutes earlier had seemed like the underdog, was now the only one standing unscathed. They circled each other slowly. Lau's posture was cold and unreadable. Darkus's breath slowed as he prepared for another clash. In an instant, Lau's form vanished. He reappeared behind Darkus, his sword cutting through the air in a deadly arc, aimed straight for the neck. But before the strike could land, Darkus's voice rang out, sharp and urgent, calling for Loue to wait. Lau's sword halted just in time. Darkus immediately dropped his weapon. He surrendered with a short breath and admitted he had no intention of risking serious injury. There was still work waiting for him outside the arena. Looking down at Eddie, still unconscious, Darkus remarked that it would be foolish to end up in the same state. His tone was light, but the resignation in his voice was unmistakable. Loue said nothing in return. He simply assessed the situation for a moment before sheathing his sword back into its scabbard. Darkus watched him closely, reading the stillness in Lau's eyes and the slight twitch of his fingers. It was then that Darkus fully realized what he was facing. This boy wasn't just talented. He was dangerous. He was a force entirely unlike anything Darkus had seen before. Internally, Darkus admitted he had no explanation for how someone so young could possess such overwhelming power. He stood there, shaken, thinking that this boy, this Loue, might truly be a monster cloaked in the body of a calm, nameless adventurer. The crowd whispered in astonishment, trying to piece together what they had just seen. Loue had entered the arena as an unknown. Now he walked away as the one who had single-handedly defeated 2 triple-digit rankers, each known across the continent. Luke still couldn't see Lau's true strength, yet her face blushed as she realized that Loue was, indeed, a monster. The black-haired lady then announced in a clear and commanding voice that the match had concluded, declaring contestant number 53, Loue, as the victor. The moment those words echoed through the hall, Luke abruptly turned and departed, ignoring the lady's call behind her. Left watching her retreating figure, the black-haired lady wondered aloud where she was rushing off to in such a hurry. She navigated swiftly through the corridors until she reached a restricted room filled with high-tech equipment and glowing terminals. Without delay, she began accessing the exclusive internal database reserved for official recognition office use. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, and within moments, she had located the file. The profile displayed a name, Tully. Age, 17. Status, unranked. No previous records. No affiliations. No known criminal activity. The information startled her. It seemed impossible that someone who had demonstrated such overwhelming skill could have remained unnoticed until now. She stood frozen for a moment, processing the implications. The lack of any affiliations or prior evaluations only deepened her amazement. He must have come from somewhere far removed from any of their standard registries. This wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. Then, realization struck, and a grin slowly stretched across her face. What she had uncovered wasn't just a skilled adventurer. This was a hidden gem, buried in obscurity and now stepping into the light. Her heart raced with the thrill of discovery, and she couldn't contain her excitement. She whispered to herself in stunned joy, unable to believe what she was seeing. Where had this boy been hiding all this time? Without a second thought, she dashed from the room, calling out Lau's name, her voice echoing with determination. When Luke arrived back at the main hall, her gaze locked onto her target. Loue stood at the center, but she wasn't alone in her enthusiasm. A crowd had already gathered, other agents and recognition office workers, each attempting the same thing, offering to become Lau's exclusive agent. The sight stopped her in her tracks. Her excitement curdled into frustration. Luke had moved quickly, but not quickly enough. The others had seen what she saw and were now fighting to stake their claim. Disappointment flared in her chest as she scolded herself for not acting sooner. If only she had taken the time to properly check his credentials, she would have discovered him first. Meanwhile, Loue stood looking slightly puzzled amid the chaos. With a composed voice, he asked what it meant to have an exclusive agency. Luke immediately stepped forward, her earlier dismay replaced by resolve, and she began to explain. An exclusive agent, she said, is someone designated to oversee an adventurer's rankings and performance directly. Normally, an adventurer had to await official evaluations to change their rank, often dependent on office location and availability. But with an exclusive agent, that restriction was lifted. With them, rank adjustments could be made on the spot, wherever the adventurer might be. It was, she noted, especially useful for travelers who undertook constant expeditions in remote or dangerous areas. With that, she retrieved a small device from her pocket. It was sleek and shiny with glowing red trim, an official rank tell. This tool, she explained, was reserved only for designated agents, allowing instant synchronization with the central ranking database. She showed it to Loue as she concluded her pitch, stating that choosing an exclusive agent would make his path toward advancement much smoother. Loue took a moment to consider her words. Then, with calm clarity, he responded. He would accept an exclusive agent, but only on one condition. Whoever he chose had to promise that they would help him reach the top 10 of the Explorer rankings. The crowd went still at his condition. Murmurs rippled through those gathered. Lau's condition was shocking of how difficult it would be to fulfill. The top 10 Explorer ranks were occupied by legends, individuals whose names echoed across continents. To reach that height was a task many considered impossible. Still, Lau's gaze was unwavering. He wasn't looking for flattery or empty promises, only a companion who truly believed in the path ahead and in their ability to walk it beside him. Luke watched as he turned and walked away, leaving the crowd behind. Panic struck her, and she shoved through the gathering, chasing after him, her footsteps echoing down the stone hallways. She called out again and again, urging him to stop. She eventually caught up with him as he neared the exit. Breathless but determined, her eyes locked onto his, and she asked why he was so committed to reaching the top 10. Her tone was serious, her question direct. Loue didn't hesitate, answering coolly that it was personal and didn't concern anyone else. At that, raising her voice, she declared that it did concern her now, that she would make it her mission to help him get there, no matter the obstacles. She looked up at him, eyes shining with conviction. In that moment, she vowed to serve as his exclusive agent and to help him climb all the way to the top. Lau's expression softened, and for a moment, he hesitated. Then he turned and walked off, responding with surprising gentleness. He said he didn't want to put someone so young in harm's way. The words took a moment to register. When they did, her face flushed red. With indignation flaring in her chest, she snapped back at him, demanding to know if he had just called her a child. She revealed that she was a certified agent within the organization and insisted that Loue, despite his capabilities, was still just a child like her. Calmly, and without turning his gaze, Loue stated firmly that her age wasn't the reason he refused her offer. He simply wasn't looking to hire anyone. He didn't want to drag others into the burdens he had chosen to carry alone. Yet, the young woman remained undeterred. Her expression hardened with a confidence that cut through her earlier vulnerability. Her voice rose, not in anger, but with clarity and purpose. She declared that she had no intention of standing aside when she could act, insisting there was something she absolutely could do as well. With genuine passion in her voice, she proclaimed her willingness to risk her life if it meant aiding a cause that mattered. That, she said, was why she wanted to work with Loue, not just as an agent, but as a partner united by shared conviction. Loue turned, and the two stood silently for a moment, facing one another against the vast cityscape, now painted gold by the setting sun. Her message had reached him. He listened closely, sensing that her desire to help wasn't superficial. It was fueled by a deeply personal goal. Her eyes gleamed with the same kind of intensity he had once seen in Eunice, when she had confessed her desire to journey into the wide world, even if it meant going alone. He thought back to the promise he made 1 year earlier to Adol, the goal that had driven him here in the first place. Meeting her determined gaze, he spoke in a quiet but unwavering tone, admitting that he, too, carried something he absolutely had to accomplish. Their shared need for purpose bound them in that moment, more than any formal agreement could. With a smile that carried both challenge and excitement, she extended her hand and told him she would see to it that he became one of the most vital names in the recognition office's records. With that, she introduced herself as Luke Media and promised to lead Loue to the top ranks. Suppressing a small smile, Loue introduced himself in return. The handshake that followed marked the true beginning of their partnership. Later, the scene shifted to a modest house she had rented as a temporary base. She gave Loue a warm tour and asked, with hopeful excitement, whether he found the place acceptable. She explained that it was only rented for a few days, just enough to serve as a starting point. Loue thanked her politely, acknowledging her competence in handling the arrangements. She dismissed the praise with a bashful gesture, though a flicker of frustration showed at his indifference. Still, when Loue hesitated to commit and proposed a 1-week trial period instead, her reaction was swift and intense. Outraged, she raised her voice and vowed that she would prove herself within that time. She even mimicked Lau's quiet tone and mockery, determined to show him just how serious she was. Loue responded without any enthusiasm, which only made her more annoyed. She told him not to act like none of this mattered. Then, crossing her arms with a dramatic sigh, she remarked that someone as powerful and sharp in battle as Loue seemed almost clueless when it came to day-to-day life. Loue calmly admitted that he'd heard that before. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Data. With excitement, she pulled out her ranktel device and informed Loue that his official test results had arrived. According to the initial report, Lau's adventurer rank was listed at 2,728th. She congratulated him, assuring him that it was a strong foundation for advancement. Loue had expected something far higher, perhaps even a triple-digit ranking. This puzzled her, until he explained that both Eddie and Darkus, his opponents during the test, held ranks in the low hundreds. Based on that, he had assumed his own standing would be closer to theirs. Luke then offered a critical explanation. The adventure category, she said, was one of the most saturated and competitive fields within the recognition office. It required more than strength. Strategy, experience, and versatility mattered equally. Using the ranktel, she accessed Lau's expanded report. His explorer rank remained at 2,728th, but his ranking as a swordsman stood at an astonishing 58th. Loue asked whether that number held any special meaning. She explained that a rank of 58th signified elite-level capability, something that few achieved and even fewer maintained. When Loue asked if Eddie and Darkus held other rankings, Emidia confirmed that they did and began reading them aloud. All Darkus's rankings included 753rd as a mercenary, 521st as a swordsman, 209th as a special cleaner, 2,831st as an investigator, and 86th as a trusted boss. Eddie Markman's classifications were similarly extensive. 402nd among archers, 78th among marksmen, 211th as a scout, and an unexpectedly high rank of 19th in mushroom cultivation. She explained that holding multiple rankings was both common and demanding. While it could broaden opportunities and prove versatility, it also came with added responsibilities. Curious, she asked Loue if he intended to register for additional rankings. He declined instantly. With little hesitation, he told her that he wasn't interested in piling more work onto his path. The worker smiled knowingly, noting aloud that she was beginning to understand the kind of person Loue really was. She then summed up his objective without ambiguity. Lau's sole focus was to rise through the Explorer rankings as quickly and efficiently as possible until he reached the top 10. Then, her expression shifted. With a spark in her eye, she pointed skyward and spoke with certainty. She believed Lau's true goal was to reach Sky Island. Loue remained silent, listening to her with steady patience. No interruption came from him as her words gradually revealed her thoughts. When she was done, he asked how she had known his goal. Her response was calm and matter-of-fact. Only adventurers ranked in the top 10 were ever granted access to the island. Then she turned the question around, asking if he would be willing to reveal his reason for seeking the island once their trial partnership had ended. He agreed without resistance. In turn, she promised to share her own reasons when the time came, though she warned that her situation was difficult to explain, especially to someone unfamiliar with the inner workings of the ranking system. Her tone grew subdued as she hinted that her pursuit involved uncovering the darkness behind the rankings. A chill passed through the air between them. Yet when Loue asked for clarification, she waved the comment off, downplaying its importance and moving on. Her focus shifted quickly. She asked how someone like him could possess such strength and mastery with the sword. His answer was direct and plain. He had spent the past year as an apprentice to a knight. The moment he mentioned the name Adol, her body stiffened in disbelief. Her hand shot forward, grabbing him in stunned urgency as she asked if he truly meant Adol, the top-ranked knight, the strongest in the world. He replied that Adol had once described himself in similar terms. His nonchalance only deepened her surprise. She spoke quickly, explaining how Adol was a legendary figure across the continent. No, not just for his strength, but for his solitude. He had never before taken a disciple. Rumors had long circulated that he might choose a successor among the elite young knights, but no one believed such a thing had truly happened. And yet here stood a boy claiming to be Adol's apprentice. Her disbelief morphed into stunned awe as she muttered that the Knight Corps would collapse from shock if they discovered the truth. Unmoved by her reaction, Loue recalled having once asked Adol whether he was really that great. Her answer came with a beaming expression. Adol, she said, was not just great. He was the greatest hero and most powerful warrior the world had ever known. Lau's response was casual. He mentioned that he had once struck Adol with his sword. Her eyes widened in horror, and she cried out that such a thing was impossible. The words left her reeling. Emilia stared at her device, speechless, wondering how someone could deliver such outrageous claims so casually. She found no record, no affiliations, no past ranking. Nothing to suggest that Loue was anything but a complete mystery. Her thoughts turned serious as the pieces refused to fit. Lau's mind drifted to a conversation from a year earlier. In that memory, he had asked Adol about the meaning of family names and titles. Adol admitted it was a foreign concept to him, but recommended that if Loue truly wanted the fastest path to Sky Island, he should adopt the name of Tully. The name, Adol had said, might open doors, but it could also invite danger. Loue accepted the suggestion after brief consideration, trusting the advice. The present moment returned. Emilia's eyes narrowed as she asked whether the name Tully was just something made up. Loue responded firmly, stating that it was no fabrication. The name was real. It belonged to his family, and it mattered deeply to him. She smiled warmly, her tone soft as she thanked him for his honesty. They agreed to end the day's work, and she casually began removing her hat, remarking that she would feel more comfortable without it. When Loue saw her unveiled appearance, a puzzled look spread across his face. In a quiet, almost confused voice, he asked whether she was actually a girl. His tone made it clear that he had not realized it. Her reaction was explosive. She shouted in embarrassment and anger, asking how it had taken him so long to notice. His response was a single, sincere word of apology. Furious, she stared at him, hands clenched in frustration. With exasperation in her voice, she demanded to know if that was truly all he had to say. The exchange ended with an air of comical tension hanging between them. The next morning brought with it the hum of city life beneath a calm blue sky. Emilia sat reading a newspaper, lost in its pages with a look of focus. As Loue descended from the upper floor, Emilia greeted him and remarked that he had woken early. In his mind, Loue noted that he had only come down for drawing water, which was only confusing Emilia. When he caught sight of her, he paused, exclaimed that it wasn't important. They exchanged morning greetings. She invited him to join her for breakfast, and with cheerful enthusiasm, she placed her hat back on. Her voice rang with determination as she declared that today would mark the beginning of their shared journey. Their first meeting to plan his ascent into the top 10 would soon begin. Later, in a simple restaurant tucked within the city's quieter streets, she explained how one advanced in the adventurer rankings. Most promotions, she said, came through discovery and development efforts. She elaborated. Adventurers gained recognition by exploring unknown territories or building and improving settlements. While optional, quests were the most reliable way to climb. These missions varied widely, from guarding caravans and investigating ruins to clearing monsters or recovering lost relics. She explained that successful completion not only earned money, but also strengthened a candidate's position in the rankings. She added that the recognition office tracked every registered mission, and agents like herself could instantly update the records when assigned exclusively. This would save precious time and ensure that Lau's rank increased in real time. Loue listened intently as he ate, absorbing every word while she explained how travelers were in constant demand, tasked with everything from resource acquisition to special investigations. With a cheerful smile, she mentioned that access to these missions would be seamless with her assistance. Loue remarked that the tool seemed quite practical. In response, she playfully offered him unlimited use of it, provided he named her his exclusive agent. Loue replied that he would consider it, continuing his meal in thoughtful silence. Curious, Loue asked whether there were any missions that could significantly boost his ranking in a short time. She explained that selecting more difficult tasks would yield higher rewards in terms of rank advancement. Without hesitation, Loue scanned the list and selected the most challenging assignment available: to locate a lost treasure within the submerged Lokiana temple, ranked as the 7th most dangerous area on record. Her reaction was immediate and alarmed. She strongly objected, insisting that the task was far too advanced for him. She urged him to reconsider, warning that the temple posed real threats and could easily claim his life. Despite her growing concern, Loue remained firm. He explained that he needed to challenge himself in order to understand his own limits. Emilia pleaded once more, asking him to trust her expertise and judgment as a certified agent. But Lau's eyes held a resolve that would not waver. He reminded her that Sky Island was the most perilous place in the world, and returning to safety was no longer an option for him. The weight of his words hit her hard, and for a brief moment, she stood frozen under the burden of his determination. Internally, she wrestled with frustration, recognizing that he was stubborn to a fault. She began thinking of ways to change his mind before something irreversible happened. Before she could speak again, an unfamiliar voice interrupted them, asking in a light-hearted tone if there was some sort of disagreement. Emilia immediately recognized the newcomer as Loue. Her reaction was filled with shock. The man smiled at her, noting that it had been quite some time since they last crossed paths. When Loue asked who he was, Emilia quickly identified him as Loue Blowerward, a formidable adventurer currently ranked 11th on the Explorer list. Lau's eyes widened at the name. Adol's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that those near the top of the Explorer rankings were monsters in human form. Loue now understood that the man before him was one of those very monsters, barely a single rank away from gaining entry to Sky Island. Seizing the moment, Emilia turned to Loue with excitement and declared that his timing was perfect. Without hesitation, she requested a favor. Then, spinning around to face Loue, she suddenly shouted for him to fight Loue in a duel. The scene shifted to a dueling arena. Loue stood ready to face the 11th rank monster. Loue came on the opposite side, weapon in hand, and apologized for the delay. He explained that he hadn't expected anyone to challenge him and had to borrow a weapon at the last minute. Despite that, he believed it would serve well enough for the match. Loue stood with calm seriousness, introducing himself with quiet formality. The atmosphere around them shifted as both men prepared to clash, one a rising mystery, the other a known force standing at the threshold of legend. Loue responded with an easygoing remark, saying that adventurers didn't need to speak with such seriousness and that natural conversation suited their kind better. Loue turned to Emilia. He praised her skill and reliability as an agent who had once managed his ranking with remarkable care and expertise. According to him, Emilia stood apart from other agents due to her deep passion, vast knowledge, and diligent attitude toward her work. Because of that, he said he was more than willing to help in any way she asked. As he prepared himself for battle, Loue remarked that Emilia had asked him to teach a stubborn rookie a proper lesson. Though, judging by her expression, it was clear she held some affection for the young challenger. Loue braced himself for the fight, aware of the immense strength radiating from his opponent. The energy surrounding Loue was sharp, spear-like, and gave off the impression that a single careless move could end the battle immediately. From the sideline, Emilia called out to Loue with visible excitement, encouraging him to take this chance to understand just how vast the world truly was. Loue remained silent at first, lost in his own thoughts, then acknowledged quietly to himself that if this duel was to test the world scale, he was prepared. The surge of prana building around him exploded outward, and he murmured aloud that he had long understood the immense size and force of the world he now stood against. On one side stood Tully, ranked 2,728th. Across from him, Loue Blowerward, ranked 11th. Both faced one another in a clash of their own strength. Emilia raised her hand high and shouted to begin the match. They rushed forward at blinding speed, weapons clashing with brutal force. Sparks erupted and waves of energy burst from every impact. Loue struck with his sword, now infused with prana, unleashing a sharp gale that shocked Loue with its sheer power. As he dodged, Laude's thoughts raced. He recognized the infusion of prana in both Lau's sword and armor, noting how the boy enhanced his movement with each surge of energy. A flicker of familiarity passed through his mind. Something about Lau's swordplay felt familiar for him. For a moment, he considered the possibility that this was the saint's sword style of the great knights, a technique traditionally passed to only one successor each generation. He quickly dismissed the thought, believing it too improbable. Before Laud could delve deeper into his thoughts, Lau pressed in with intense force, breaking his focus and declaring in a stern voice that battle was no place for idle thinking as he moved behind Laud. The clash continued fiercely. Laud adjusted his spear to cover his back, blocking the incoming strike. At that, Laud jabbed back, musing on how relaxed he felt. This prompted Lau to grit his teeth before continuing. Exchanging powerful blows with deliberate precision, Lau maintained his relentless assault. Energy crackled around them as their weapons collided in rapid succession. Each strike echoed with a violent burst of force, lighting up the battlefield with sparks and shockwaves. Inwardly, Laud couldn't help but marvel at the sheer amount of prana Lau possessed, surpassing even his own. On top of that, he recognized the familiar shimmer of Lau's prana. Laud eventually pulled back slightly, eyes fixed on Lau's overwhelming energy. He realized that the boy possessed more prana than he did and noted a peculiar shimmer surrounding him. Curious, Laud asked Lau directly what race he belonged to. Caught off guard, Lau responded with confusion, unsure what was meant by the question. Laud pressed the issue, stating firmly that ignorance wouldn't mask the truth. This kind of prana, he said, was something one had to be born with. When Lau remained tight-lipped, Laud decided he would extract the answer through combat and began gathering power, preparing his spear for a devastating counterattack. Laud asked a pointed question, wondering aloud whether Lau could use incantations. The unfamiliar word caught Lau off guard, leaving him momentarily confused as he quietly repeated it in his mind. Incantation. Without waiting, Laud began chanting with intensity, his voice echoing across the battlefield. The verse he recited, one about a wild stallion crossing mountains in pursuit of wind, carried an almost ancient rhythm. As his words filled the air, an immense surge of energy began to rise around him. A golden aura erupted and spread outward, radiant and overwhelming, leaving Lau momentarily stunned by the raw power on display. The chant continued, gaining in strength and rhythm, and in its wake, glowing spears began to manifest and hover in formation around Laud. The ritual, full of intensity and pressure, made it clear that he was preparing for an overwhelming attack. Laud's eyes fixed on Lau, urging his sparring opponent to answer in kind. He warned him bluntly, without an incantation of his own, he would surely die. His voice was grave and certain, underscoring the seriousness of the threat. The battlefield now pulsed with volatile energy. The aura pressed down on everyone present, stirring a sense of unease and anticipation. Laud remained focused on Lau, waiting to see how he would respond. Seeing the sheer scale of the magic being readied against him, Lau's expression turned tight, his jaw clenched in quiet resolve. The moment came swiftly. Laud commanded his spears at Lau, each one forged from the golden prana he had summoned. With a single motion, a storm of radiant spears launched forward, cutting through the air in a thick barrage. Stunned by the magnitude of the assault, Lau sprang into evasive motion, weaving between the incoming streaks of deadly energy and deflecting all he could. Despite his agility and speed, the effort showed in his eyes. A few spears grazed him. Laud remarked aloud that no ordinary blade could repel the force of his incantation. He flicked his fingers again, releasing a second volley of glowing spears that struck with pinpoint speed and relentless power. Lau continued his desperate maneuvers, avoiding each burst with incredible precision and instinct. When the barrage finally ceased, Lau stood still, catching his breath. His body was worn, but his focus had not broken. His mind drifted momentarily to a memory of his training, Adol's firm voice instructing him on prana control. Back then, Adol had told him that his prana remained too unstable. In time, Adol had explained he would gain the ability to use advanced techniques, but only once he achieved true control. When Lau had asked what kind of techniques he could expect to learn, Adol responded simply, promising to begin with the most basic one. That day, Adol had demonstrated a move known as the lightning blade. It was deceptively simple in form, but carried enormous speed and power. Remembering that moment, Lau now deployed the same technique. His prana covered the length of his sword, bright and unyielding. His gaze remained sharp, focused on his opponent ahead. In that instant, he released a gale of green prana that streaked toward Loue with deadly precision. The speed of the strike startled Loue, forcing him to react quickly. He spun his spear to block, barely deflecting the high-velocity blow. The force of it reverberated through his arms. Before he could recover fully, Loue closed the distance and pressed the advantage, pushing forward with a relentless and aggressive assault. Loue responded by summoning another barrage of golden spears. This time, his spell conjured an even greater array of glowing spears, surrounding him in a protective barrier. The intensity of the battle escalated again. Their energy techniques collided violently, producing a deafening explosion of light and shockwaves that tore through the space between them. As the dust cleared, Loue found himself reeling from Lau's previous strike, a lightning-fast hit that had been nearly invisible to the naked eye. Despite being caught off guard, Loue quickly regained his composure, recognizing the danger he was facing. With renewed urgency, he countered with a precise strike using his spear's advanced technique. Throwing the spear in his hand, a focus-powered strike aimed directly at Loue. Still recovering from the explosion, Loue was momentarily overwhelmed by the swiftness and impact of Lau's retaliatory move. The sheer strength from Loue sent Loue crashed off course. As he flicked his fingers, Loue firmly stated that the wall ahead was still too high, a barrier too great for him to overcome, no matter how fierce his efforts. He initiated his next technique with unwavering focus, summoning a ring of golden energy spears that quickly enclosed the battlefield, trapping Loue from every direction. Lau's form laid motionless amidst the blinding radiance, his expression locked between anticipation and controlled intensity. With a sharp gaze fixed on Loue, he delivered a warning. He told Loue not to underestimate the weight carried by adventurer rankings. Without hesitation, the golden spears were unleashed in a relentless burst. Unable to escape or counter the incoming onslaught, Loue wore a faint expression of frustration as though dissatisfied by the corner into which he had been forced. The impact of the attack rocked the entire arena, obliterating the platform beneath and hurling debris and clouds of dust across the stands. At the heart of the devastation, Loue lay unconscious within a crater, his body still and unmoving, overtaken by the sheer force of Lau's spell. With it, the result of the spar came without ambiguity. Loue Blowerward, ranked 11th among adventurers, had emerged victorious. Once the battle concluded, Emidia approached with a smile, and Loue casually asked if she was satisfied with the result. Responding with a faint smile, Emidia admitted that she was. She thanked him sincerely for the help, adding that the fight had helped Loue gain a better understanding of the realities he faced. Loue replied calmly that she was quite skilled at spinning words. He then turned serious, walking off as he expressed his understanding that she truly believed Loue could have won. Quiet and thoughtful, Emidia answered that she had only believed it was a possibility. It wasn't the fact that Loue had been trained by the renowned knight Adol that shaped her conviction. It was that Loue claimed he had reached Adol with his blade. She hadn't expected Loue to recognize it so quickly. Loue expressed that he had indeed noticed Lau's sword moves. The lightning-swift sword strike Loue had unleashed was unmistakably part of the sacred and clandestine Saint Sword style, a technique passed down exclusively to a single successor in each generation. With voice laced with confusion, Loue questioned aloud what was happening. He noted that such a revered style was meant only for knights, and Loue, being merely an adventurer, possessing that skill could easily be perceived as a deep insult to the knightly order, as though something sacred had been stolen. Emidia reacted strongly to the revelation, exclaiming that she had to ensure Loue would not come into contact with any knight rankers from that point forward. Loue agreed with the sentiment, acknowledging that if Loue encountered the wrong knight, the consequences could be deadly for both of them. He suggested that Loue consider registering as a knight, believing that such a move would avoid unnecessary conflict and make their path far smoother. The concern on Emedia's face deepened. She was clearly weighing Lau's words, visibly unsettled but still silent. Her memory drifted to a moment when Loue, with calm conviction, had stated that he was determined to accomplish something no matter the cost, even if it seemed beyond reason. This was the true reason she believed in his strength. Yes, he was a student of Adol, and that alone was monumental. But more than that, Loue had told her directly that he had landed a blow on Adol himself. Upon hearing this, Loue dismissed the idea outright. To him, it sounded impossible, especially considering Lau's current level of experience. His disbelief mirrored Amelia's original reaction, but she then recalled that Loue wasn't the type to fabricate such a claim. She also reminded Loue that he had agreed to the same logic earlier. Loue grew quiet, contemplating the situation. The Saint's blade style had been a startling revelation, but what had truly unsettled him was the faint, otherworldly shimmer that lingered around Loue during battle. There was something beyond training, something hidden, wrapped within that energy. It hinted at a deeper mystery yet to be unraveled. Suddenly, Emilia asked if he had noticed anything else. Without hesitation, Loue revealed that Loue had also shown signs of knowing how to invoke incantation-based spells. His tone was careful, but there was a hint of unease in his admission. He added that had Loue fully activated such incantations during their battle, the outcome might have been very different, and he might have been lost instead. The scene shifted, revealing Loue inside a house, his body now reduced to the size of an infant. The one caring for him sat close by, his mother watching him with gentle concern. At the same time, a lullaby-like story was being sung in a soft, soothing tone in an effort to lull him to sleep. As his mother, gently caressing him, an elderly woman from their village entered abruptly. Her expression turned stern as she questioned the song being sung. With clear disapproval, she warned that such a song was forbidden. It was considered the worst of all things and had no place in this house. She declared that their people had remained trapped, unable to return to the outside world, solely because of that poem. If even a fragment of it surfaced again, she warned, her own actions might become dangerously unpredictable. She urged the young mother to remember her words, adding that it would be wise never to sing the poem again. With a whisper of regret, Lau's mother offered an apology to him. At that moment, Loue opened his eyes. His body was covered in bandages, his frame weak and riddled with wounds. The marks of injury were fresh, and the pain etched into his face reflected the toll of what had passed. As his eyes searched the dim room, he asked what had happened. A familiar voice responded. Emilia, sitting beside him, remarked that he had finally awoken. She explained that this place was the Recognition Bureau's infirmary, a sanctuary where injured individuals were brought to be treated and restored. It was a place of healing and recovery. She told him he had been asleep for a very long time, an entire day in fact. Loue seemed surprised, questioning if he had really slept through the entire day. Emilia confirmed this, explaining that his body had been wrapped in bandages, his injuries cared for, but there was more to it than that. What stood out most was the doctor's diagnosis. According to the medical assessment, the problem wasn't just physical. Loue carried a great deal of emotional and mental strain. His mind had been weighed down by numerous unresolved burdens, which had built up over time and eventually caused him to collapse. Emilia admitted she didn't know what exactly he had been carrying, but noted that it was clearly something heavy, something that made him angry and restless far too often. She urged him not to push himself too hard here. Instead, she encouraged him to learn how to manage and center himself. Loue remained puzzled, unsure of how the doctor had come to such a conclusion. Yet, as his thoughts drifted to the past, he began to acknowledge the truth in those words. He admitted, quietly, that he had indeed been carrying a great frustration on his mind for far too long. Still, Emilia looked at him thoughtfully and moved closer. Her voice took on a more serious tone as she told him there was something important he needed to hear. She explained that there were certain arts, techniques of ancient origin, incantations that he must learn. Understanding them was essential. These arts weren't merely skills. They were unique methods of channeling and reawakening dormant power within. She asked whether he was already familiar with the concept of such techniques. Loue responded that he was not. With that, she began her explanation. She described the incantations as specialized prana through which old and hidden strengths could be drawn forth. Certain clans had mastered the use of these powers. Among them were those ranked highest, individuals capable of wielding abilities from the ancient bloodlines. Loue asked whether Loue was such person. Only those who bore this lineage could fully access the powers tied to that heritage. That meant his incantations was knowledge, an inheritance of legacy and power. These incantations was an extension of his lineage's strength. The knowledge of these arts was connected to the warrior of Blower Ward tribes. Emidia explained that these techniques were not just abilities. They were ancestral legacies passed down through generations. The Blower tribe, she explained, was a combat-oriented race skilled in hunting, and they lived in the southern marshlands. Because the arts often passed down orally as poems among the tribes, they were called incantations. There's genetic component as well, she added, and it's usually difficult to acquire them later in life. Loue processed the revelation aloud, remarking that even Laud had access to such formidable techniques. Emidia believed that Loue, too, possessed such a gift. Even if he didn't yet understand it, the signs were there. She confided that she had long suspected this. His repeated use of strange powers, the innate strength he displayed, it all pointed to something dormant and deeply rooted. She believed without doubt that he harbored an ancient power within him, something he had yet to awaken. She asked him directly whether there was anything, no matter how small, that could hint at the nature of his hidden arts. Perhaps even a fragment of memory could serve as a clue to unlock the secret of his abilities. Loue paused, his thoughts drifting backward. In his memory, a distant scene surfaced. It was when he was very young, only a child, and in that hazy recollection, his mother was gently humming a song. That moment stood out as the only clear fragment of his early life. It was faint, yet familiar, and it stirred something within him. Reflecting on it, Loue admitted that perhaps he did know something, at least enough to suspect that there was more to his past than he understood. Upon hearing this, Emidia became visibly energized. She considered this a fortunate breakthrough. With this new information, she believed it would now be much easier to climb into the top 10 of the adventure rankings. Emidia expressed her determination to see Loue rise, to make him a top ranker. When she was done, she took out the rank tell. From it, she revealed a mission request that had come through. The request, she explained, was ideal for Loue. It aligned with his current state, and it could serve as the perfect opportunity for him to take his first real step into the competitive world of rankings. The scene displayed a vast forest, the Azaban Forest. The request involved an investigation of that area, and the forest itself was designated as Danger Zone number 48 in the system's rankings. It had also been classified as part of an ecological survey. Loue asked whether they were truly expected to conduct an ecological survey, study animals, examine their behaviors, and document every aspect of the forest ecosystem. Emidia confirmed that studying the environment was indeed part of the mission requirements. However, she added that several individuals who had ventured into the Azaban forest had gone missing without explanation. Emidia mentioned that many of those lost was an adventurers ranked at 800s, a rank high enough to suggest considerable skill and experience. And yet, even they had vanished. But that danger came with opportunity. If the mystery surrounding Azaban Forest could be solved, the reward would be immense. A successful resolution would increase Lou's adventure ranking by 200 ranks, potentially more, depending on the nature of the threats uncovered. Loue stood up, moved closer to her, and made his decision. He announced that he would accept the request. He acknowledged that she had likely presented him with this opportunity because she believed he could handle it. She smiled as she said that she was sure of it. Right after, she turned to her gadget and officially accepting the request through a rank tell. Emidia then briefed him further. Portions of the forest, and even parts of the sky above, had been designated as restricted. Certain animals were protected, and areas were labeled to prevent disruption of delicate environments. The goal was to maintain ecological balance. Because she would accompany him, many dangers would be mitigated. Still, even with her presence, caution would be essential. Loue asked what would happen if they broke the rules. Violating the rules, she explained, would lead to an immediate drop in adventure rank. The system monitored behavior carefully. Any wrongdoing, whether accidental or intentional, could damage a person's standing. Even small mistakes could trigger penalties, and if someone caused larger disruptions, their rank could plummet drastically. The penalties were proportional to the violations. With that, Emidia declared their preparations complete. The request had been accepted, and now the path was set. Turning to Loue, she told him that this marked a new beginning. From here onward, they would move forward together, partners in this task. The mission would not only test their strength, but determine their future positions in the ranks. Emidia made her intentions clear. She would help guide him to the top. With this request, she aimed to see him among the top 10 adventurers. Whatever it took, she would see it through. This marked the first true step toward rising in the adventure rankings. With determination, they would face the challenge together. Loue and his companion united in effort. A quiet smile formed on Lau's face as he accepted what lay ahead. It was faint but real, a rare moment of visible resolve. As the moment settled, the scene shifted. The view turned to the Azaban forest. Towering trees filled the plain, their beauty shadowed by an eerie stillness. The landscape was majestic, yet held a quiet menace beneath its canopy. Within the forest, a violent moment unfolded. A man held another by the neck, his grip tightening with unrelenting force. With cold conviction, the aggressor accused the man in his grasp of a grave mistake. He had seen too much. He had witnessed their operation, the very things that were never meant to be observed. Nearby, another individual questioned whether yet another life had been taken. This repeated killing of outsiders, he argued, had crossed the line. It was wrong, but the killer brushed it off. He claimed these low-ranked adventurers were nothing but a nuisance, interferences, mere obstacles to their work. He turned and walked toward a cage stationed nearby. Inside, behind its thick bars, was a creature both majestic and rare, a Yunahasauros. Gazing at it, the killer remarked that this would bring far more than just satisfaction. It would bring advancement. Killing a unicorn and selling its horn, he said, would skyrocket his rank. With the sale, he imagined rising to the level of a 3-digit ranker. The other man who stood behind him, Rosso Cruel, he held a certain presence, and his tone carried depth. He agreed that strength alone was not enough to rise in rank. Survival, persistence, and the will to defy injustice mattered just as much. Rosso seemed different, more principled. He acknowledged the unfairness of the system and the challenges faced by those who fought through it. He voiced his intent to support people like that. His appearance was striking, his hair resembling writhing serpents, alive and shifting like serpentine extensions of himself. The killer declared that if he surrendered this prime hunting ground, he would lose his shot at entering the top 100. He vowed to claim his place among the elite adventurers, and to do that, he had to control territories like this. His name was Dalcaniris. There was a harshness in his eyes, and his body radiated strength. Though his current rank stood at 672nd, his aspirations reached far beyond that. Dalcan was relentless. He broke into strange laughter. It wasn't joy, but anticipation. Something had changed. Perhaps it was the presence of the unicorn. Perhaps it was the thrill of the hunt. Whatever it was, his laughter filled the forest air, unsettling and wild. Before long, Loue and Luke entered the Azaban forest. Loue gestured toward the guard, who instructed him to proceed ahead and conduct a ranking check. Loue complied and handed over his identity card. The guard confirmed that Lau's adventure ranking was 2,728th and granted him access without issue. With their entry granted, Loue expressed curiosity and asked about the total number of individuals within the adventure ranking. In response, Luke explained that the total stood at approximately 30,000 active participants, with around 20,000 still engaged in exploration. She described that the environment beyond was a hell's cape, dangerous and unforgiving. She emphasized that the adventurer ranking held unique significance, standing apart from other classifications. The nature of its hierarchy was particularly intense. Loue sought further clarity, prompting her to elaborate. Luke explained that when an adventurer entered the 4-digit ranks within the adventurer ranking, their presence began to rival even those in the highest 3-digit positions in other categories. Rank did not always correspond directly to power. A 3-digit adventurer ranker could easily overpower a 2-digit ranker from another category. In other domain, digits were symbolic but not definitive. True strength was forged within the adventurer ranking. Loue reflected on this explanation, sensing the fierce competitiveness present in the field. His expression showed that he understood the weight of the system. Walking ahead of him, Luke also appeared to recognize the magnitude of the situation, though her demeanor remained lighthearted. They made their way deeper, and the surrounding environment was stunning, brimming with natural beauty. Luke observed the landscape with excitement, loudly acknowledging that their adventure was truly beginning. Their journey took them deeper into the Azaban forest, an area designated as Danger Zone 48. A moment later, sensing a shift of change on Luke's expression, Loue asked if something was wrong. He explained that his instincts had been triggered, noting that something about the forest didn't feel ordinary. Luke acknowledged his observation, impressed that he had perceived it. She recalled what had been stated before entering. Only a true adventurer, one with refined instincts and experience, could detect such irregularities. Even the terrain, though seemingly unremarkable, could harbor threats. She explained that ordinary people would have no way of knowing, let alone understanding, the danger. This, she emphasized, was the reason the danger zone ranking existed. Luke continued explaining that Azaban Forest had been added to the danger zone ranking 2 months ago due to a monster outbreak. With each step, the forest proved more menacing. Every tree, every clearing, every faint sound could conceal a threat. Though beautiful, the forest wore a deceptive mask. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted when powerful beasts emerged without warning, and their presence overwhelming. These creatures advanced swiftly, targeting both Luke and Loue without hesitation. Reacting instantly, Loue unsheathed his sword and prepared for battle. Luke called out to him with urgency, demanding protection. Loue responded without hesitation, assuring her there would be no problem. In that instant, he released a burst of energy, employing a slashing technique that tore through the oncoming beasts with apparent ease. As he carved a path forward, dispatching the monsters efficiently, waves of aura radiated from the battlefield. These pulses of energy began attracting even more threats. Soon, the area echoed with howls as additional monsters were drawn to the surge. Despite the growing danger, Loue remained composed because beasts that lacked strong spiritual presence were easily dealt with. Having finished off the initial wave, Loue raised his prana and prepared his next sword technique. Prana surged through his blade, and once Loue was ready, he released a sharp gale of sword blade at the perfect moment, cutting through the new wave of monsters in a single strike. Observing the technique, Luke immediately recognized it, and she asked if it was the one Adol had taught him. Loue casually confirmed that it was indeed one of Adol's teachings. He admitted that Adol had passed down many powerful techniques to him, though he couldn't use all of them yet. Still, with the increasing threat, he declared it might be time to use the second technique. This decision came in response to a particularly dangerous beast approaching. The Brad Orc, a monster ranked 126th in the danger level charts. Its mere presence shifted the atmosphere, and its guttural growl made it clear it wouldn't fall to ordinary means. Loue stood firm, resolving to use his full strength. Gathering his energy, he invoked the mid-path lotus flower. It demanded far greater strength and concentration to control his prana. At a glance, it appeared Loue had released a consecutive sword aura gale made entirely of pure prana, striking in a cross shape directly at the center of the massive orc. However, the attack failed. Instead of cutting down the monster, the energy dispersed harmlessly. Loue and Luke stared in disbelief. Neither could understand why the technique had failed, especially after such a dramatic buildup of power. The creature responded with aggression, charging forward with its hand extended, hostile and feral. With no time to reflect, both Loue and Luke turned and ran. Despite the failure, Loue remained composed, acknowledging aloud that the technique had ended in failure after all. Barely keeping pace, Luke berated him, accusing him of failing to protect his companion despite claiming to be a ranker. Their desperate flight brought them to a steep, jagged cliff. Luke cried out at the sight of the drop, unsure of what to do. Lau's response was immediate and without hesitation. He declared they would jump. Before Luke could protest, Loue grabbed her by the waist and leapt from the edge. The drop was massive, and the landscape far below was shrouded in fog and rock. Luke screamed in panic, her voice cracking as if she expected death to claim them at any moment. Yet Loue remained calm, descending swiftly and landing without difficulty. Upon touching down, he released Luke, who remained frozen, her face pale, expression hollow, as though her spirit had left her body. Loue mentioned casually that they had survived, prompting Luke to erupt in anger, demanding to know what that even meant. The implication that survival had been uncertain shocked her, and she confronted Loue, insisting that the decision to jump had been reckless. Loue offered a sheepish apology. It was something he had developed during training under Adol, a habit formed from surviving countless near-death experiences. Luke calmed herself and could only gape in disbelief, questioning what kind of training considered jumping off cliffs a normal procedure. Loue didn't deny it. Instead, he stood silently, observing the terrain with fascination. His eyes scanned the area with meticulous curiosity. Beside him, Luke watched attentively. They had entered a designated survey zone marked with an exceptionally high danger ranking. And yet, this was precisely the area their ecological survey had targeted. For them, it was a stroke of luck to have made it this far. From her understanding of the forest report, Luke explained that 80% of the survey had already been completed. However, 20% of the area remained unexplored and still held unknowns. Among the anomalies observed, she noted the strange and erratic behavior of several nearby beasts. Something about the way they moved seemed unnatural. Despite the forest's ecological richness, there was an underlying sense of unease. The balance of the ecosystem appeared fragile, unsteady, as if disturbed. Amid these observations, Luke turned to Loue and asked if something was wrong. Loue had become completely absorbed in the environment around him. His gaze lingered on the diversity of plant life and animal forms, filled with awe. The world before him felt raw and unfamiliar. He admitted to himself that he had never encountered a place like this, untouched and teeming with unknown life. This, he realized, was the essence of true adventure. His thoughts drifted to the past, to a memory of Yuna. He recalled the promise they had made, to explore the world together. Yuna had been spoken with passion and certainty. The one who shared that dream had spoken of adventure as something sacred. Now, standing in this uncharted forest, that vision returned. Loue remembered Yuna's words with clarity. In that moment, he understood what she had meant, that this was the adventure they had imagined. Just then, a shadow passed through the trees. Something moved ahead, an unfamiliar presence. Loue instinctively drew his sword, readying himself for confrontation. Luke urged caution as the figure stepped closer, revealing the source of the movement. The creature before them was not a predator. It was a Yunahasaros, a magical beast, and a rare one. The Yunahasaros limped toward them, its body weakened by some form of injury. It showed no aggression, only slow, cautious steps. Luke stepped forward carefully while Loue assessed the situation and asked if he should defeat it. Luke quickly answered that there was no need for combat. She identified the creature as a Yunahasaros, a rank 4 rare species on the verge of extinction. These beasts were often hunted for their magical horn. Loue asked if it could be healed, and Luke confirmed that she had the training to apply basic medical treatment, especially for minor wounds. Her knowledge covered the fundamentals needed for emergencies like this. Though she couldn't promise a full recovery in the field, she was confident she could stabilize the creature and prevent further injury. She suggested setting up a base camp nearby to treat it overnight. Loue agreed without hesitation. As Luke began tending to the Yunahasaros, she reminded him of their true mission. Their task was not only to catalog life, but to protect it. Conservation was just as important as observation in an ecological survey. As night fell, the temporary camp came alive with quiet activity. The Yunahasaros lay beside Luke, its breathing slow but steady. Under her care, it seemed to relax. Near the edge of camp, Loue stood silently, practicing his swordsmanship. He repeated the incantation of a technique, Middle Lotus. The phrase echoed in his mind, a remnant of a familiar series of cross-impact techniques. With a sharp motion, he hurled a slash forward. The energy arced through the air and struck a tree right in front of him. Yet the impact was weak, leaving only a shallow mark. Frustration crept across Lau's face since the attack lacked power, and he knew his strength was still insufficient. He collapsed to the ground beside his blade and stared up at the canopy. Stars shimmered through the leaves, distant, cold, and unyielding. Despite the serene night, one bitter thought echoed in his mind, an understanding that he was still far from strong enough. Lau's thoughts drifted back to his battle with Laud. The violent flashes, the crushing pressure, and the narrow margin that had separated victory from defeat. The incantation used against him had been brutally effective, and one misstep, one moment of hesitation, the outcome could have been fatal. The bitter truth echoed in his mind. He had not yet mastered those arts. Despite all his training, the power he possessed still felt incomplete. The island of God remained far beyond his reach, and the strength required to approach it still eluded him. What lay within his grasp simply wasn't enough. Luke's voice echoed in his mind, firm, resolute, speaking of Laud. Strength had followed that technique, undeniable and absolute. She had declared, without doubt, that Loue could pursue that same strength. In that quiet moment of revelation, Loue steadied himself. He sat down beneath a large tree, legs crossed, and began cultivating his energy. He focused inward, searching for the same source of strength he had witnessed in Laud. The night faded quickly into morning, and the sun's light beamed gently through the tree line. A voice broke the hush of the forest, prompting Loue to wake up. He immediately stood up and asked if something was wrong. Luke stood nearby, revealing that the injured beast, now recovering, had begun to stir with signs of agitation. The Yunahasarose shifted restlessly, its eyes glowing with unease. A soft growl escaped it, a sound heavy with warning. After observing the creature, Loue noted that its condition had improved. Luke explained that the beast's fast recovery was due to its rare bloodline and natural resilience. Its potent magical constitution had accelerated the healing process. Despite the recovery, tension remained in its eyes. Luke added that the creature was still young and, under normal circumstances, should have taken well to human contact. Its wariness, she guessed, likely stemmed from being harmed by a human before. That suspicion proved true as Loue stepped closer and focused on the Yunahasarose's horn. Deep gouges marred its horn, an evidence of a failed attempt to sever it. Poachers had long targeted such creatures. Driven by greed, they ignored ethics and law alike. Yunahasaro's horns were prized on the black market for their magical value. Despite the prohibition, strict and absolute, illegal hunting persisted. Even the threat of imprisonment had done little to stop the trade. Most poachers operated in secret, tracking down rare creatures and harvesting their parts with ruthless efficiency. The species had dwindled. The Yunahasaros they now cared for belonged to a fragile lineage teetering on extinction. Mistaking Luke for the poacher who had attacked it, the Yunahasaros lashed out suddenly, causing her to leap back in surprise. Loue moved instantly, intercepting the beast's horn with his sword. His blade met the strike and halted it effortlessly. The Yunahasaros recoiled in fear, its aggression replaced by panic. Its eyes darted between Loue and Luke. Then something inside it broke. It turned and fled. Luke reacted immediately. Urgency filled the air as the creature vanished into the deeper brush of the forest. She shouted to act quickly, but Loue hesitated. From his perspective, the Yunahasaros appeared fine. Luke disagreed, explaining that the creature was still healing, and if left alone, it could be caught again. Though its wounds had closed, they hadn't fully healed, and any encounter with a predator could prove fatal. She reminded Loue of their original mission, an ecological survey not only meant to observe but to protect. Their responsibility extended to every rare life form they encountered. This young, frightened Yunahasaros needed their help. Without delay, Loue accepted the task. He gathered his gear and prepared to pursue the fleeing creature. As he departed, Luke offered a warning that the forest was not safe. Rumors of poachers had long surrounded the region, their movements hidden behind the thick terrain. Loue paused for a moment, contemplating the risks. What if he encountered the poachers? What if he were ambushed? He asked if defeating them would raise his rank. Luke replied that it would depend on the strength of the opponent, but yes, it was possible. Motivated by the challenge, Loue advanced through the trees at speed. He reaffirmed his intent. If he encountered poachers, he would defeat as many as he could. His pace quickened. His steps were light and swift, despite the dropping visibility. Though the forest blurred past him, his determination sharpened. Loue believed that if he moved fast enough, he could still catch the Yunahasaros. Just then, a sharp was cut through the air as an arrow zipped toward him, its trajectory low and aimed at his leg. Lau's reflexes responded before thought could. In one fluid motion, he dodged the projectile, shifting his stance as the threat revealed itself. A swordsman emerged from behind, his tone laced with menace. Frustration radiated from the man as he hurled insults at Loue, mistakenly believing he was a poacher, and lunged to attack. Loue countered instantly, releasing a powerful aura that surged outward like a barrier. The shock on the swordsman's face made it clear. He had truly believed the strike would be fatal, yet it had been stopped cleanly. The sheer speed, intensity, and force of Lau's energy overwhelmed him. A flicker of realization dawned in the man's mind as he registered the strength and color of Lau's prana. The man raised his hand and faltered, urging to halt the fight. Recognition filled his voice as he studied Loue carefully. Loue immediately recognized the man. It was Darkus. Then, Loue turned his head toward the branching path behind him and saw Eddie nocking an arrow, ready to strike. Despite the familiar faces and the fact that he had just fought both of them 2 days ago, Loue couldn't recall their names, so he asked who they were. Frustration erupted simultaneously from both Darkus and Eddie as they shouted their respective names one after another.